My name is David Bornstein. I'm a writer about social innovation, and I think this is going to be a great panel. We have 4 people here with a wealth of experience in investing in very different ways and building organizations to really achieve major impact in the world. So the ground rules here are going to be very open. I'm going to ask each of the panelists one question. They're going to talk for about 8 minutes. And throughout the process, if any of you has a comment or a question, you can stand up and ask that question immediately. From the point of view of recording this, we may have to wait a second for somebody to get you a microphone. Are there people to pass microphones around? Okay. So, but you can do that right from the outset. So we're going to go for about 45 minutes of the talking, and then we'll have a whole hour for interaction, for questions and answers on any subject that you want. I'd like to just start off with something that a ritual that I saw recently, which I thought was a wonderful way to get to know the audience. It's called Stand Up, Sit Down, and I checked your folding chairs, and it is possible to stand up and sit down easily. So we just want to get a sense of who's in the room. So would you stand up if your first language is not English? And on the panel, we'll do the same. Okay. If it's your first time at the Skoll Forum. Okay.
Wow.
Okay, stand up if you got less than 6 hours sleep last night. Okay, if you consider yourself a social entrepreneur or work with social entrepreneurs. Okay. If you're a philanthropist or largely a funder, stand up. Okay. Business person. Work in government. Interesting. Okay.
Clearly a topic for discussion.
Stand up if you play an instrument or compose music. If you have written a book. If you live or work in a country where the GDP is less than $5,000 a year. Growth, GNP per capita, I'm sorry, not the whole. If you have children. Okay. If you love to cook and are a good cook. Consider yourself a good cook.
Wow.
Okay. Okay. Stand up if you're a teacher of some sort.
No longer.
I guess that's stand up. If you've already worked out this morning, stand up. Stand up if you are or have been a caregiver to someone who's sick or disabled. Primary caregiver. If you work in the field of healthcare. Okay. The environmental field. Okay. Stand up if you've changed your career in the past 3 years or plan to in the next 3 years.
Not really.
Okay. Stand up if you've encountered violence as part of your work. And if you live in a country that's different from the one you were born. Okay. Stand up if you have a tattoo. Okay. And finally, stand up if it's your birthday. Statistically, there is bound to be a birthday. No? Okay. Okay, thank you very much. Let's give yourself a round of applause. Okay, we're going to start with Ed Skloot. Ed is the president of the Surdna Foundation, which is and has been for how many years? 18 years. One of the most innovative foundations in the United States, has been at the forefront of many new ideas, very, very early on in the social enterprise nonprofit venture field. Ed was person who really sort of was the initial coiner of that idea. So Ed's going to begin, and then we're going to go to J B Schramm, who's the founder of College Summit, which is something I know very well because I wrote about it in my book, How to Change the World. Wonderful college access program for low-income people in the low-income teens in the United States. And then we're going to go to Yadigaroglu, who's a managing partner at Capricorn Capital, which invests the money of the Skoll Foundation and Jeff Skoll's money and balances, well, he'll talk about the balancing act there. And Jacqueline Novogratz, who's the founder and CEO of the Acumen Fund, which is a venture firm that invests in companies and firms, enterprises that bring water, housing, and health services making it affordable for the poor. So to begin with, Ed, if you look at your work over the past 25 years, and let's say a historian was writing this period in history, what would be the major theme that emerges?
I guess, hello, yes, can you hear me? I think I'm going to take a little bit of a roundabout till I get to that point, but because maybe a small amount of history might be of some value or use. It is sort of true in a way that I was present near the creation of what began to be called social entrepreneurship. It might be valuable to mention how it happened and what would be a trajectory, if in fact there is one, and I think that would be a subject of conversation. In 1980, I went to a foundation in New York City called the Rockefeller Brothers Fund. I had known the president there, always good to know people at the top, and made a proposal to him on one simple premise, that NGOs had to earn money as well as beg for it in order to survive. And the person who was the president, Bill Dietl, who is still around, does a lot of work, he's fabulous, said, I kind of like that idea, write me a proposal. And that's how this little venture began. Bill, RBF, gave a small grant to me and got me on the road to thinking about entrepreneurship and to thinking about how organizations that would not normally be entrepreneurial might in fact try to extend their income earning capabilities. I had worked in the sector before and was busy begging all the time, and I was tired of begging. But it was an idea, and it was an idea I just, for some historical reference points, had zero liftoff in anybody's vocabulary. And so I would go around the country and I would try to raise the subject about making money, and the hysteria that was greeted by the idea was remarkable. People wouldn't talk with you. It was immoral. It couldn't be done. All those things that we keep hearing about. So I kept pushing and pushing. The first article that was ever written, it happened to be mine, but I take no great credit for it, in the Harvard Business Review that ever talked about NGOs was written in 1983. It was published in '83, and it had to do with earning income by NGOs. And the first book that was written was edited by me in 1988. I'm not bragging. I'm just giving you the sense that what we're talking about, in my view, is 20 years old, give or take. The field that we are in, if it is a field, is really new, and what it tends to be, I think, is an agglomeration and a pulling out of lots of different instincts and historical reference points and professions, and it does not yet have a firm place, in my view, in the lexicon or in the brain space of a whole lot of people who think they are entrepreneurs for social purpose or not. To move quickly through it, in '89 I closed this little firm, New Ventures, up, and then went to the other side of the street and became a philanthropist of sorts. I work in a foundation, and the silverware changed from plastic to real silver, and the cups moved from paper to china, and all of a sudden I became someone whose point of view had much greater resonance than if I were just a typical beggar in the United States looking for money. And throughout the 90s, I would say, there was some modest growth in interest. Jacqueline got started in the late 90s, I think, give or take. JB is a little bit newer in the game. And yet, I would argue that in the 90s, if you try to stack up all, and I'm only speaking domestically now in the States, all of the social venturing that really was happening or was being talked about, if there were 25 groups or organizations that had the serious capacity to earn revenue, that would have been a lot. I'm not here including arts organizations that sell tickets. I'm not talking about museum shops. I'm talking about various enterprises that would be untraditional in the ways they have gone about building their budgets and making budget every year. Let me just say a couple more general things. So since that time, there's been a gradual move up in the trajectory of thinking about these ideas. Centers have begun at various universities. There have been a lot of publications now, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a fair amount of noise in the environment, productive noise, and I think people are gradually coming to where we are today, and certainly the Skoll Forum has begun to like a magnet underneath the table with iron filings on top. You know, it's sort of pulling them all together into a central space. In the States, the record, I think, is mixed at best, though the issue of social entrepreneurship that has to do less with making money or earning it or some form of that, and more with trying to find new ways to deal with social problems, that has begun to have a life of its own. I would argue a couple of more things, and then I'll stop so we can have some conversation. First of all, it seems to me that the States are quite different from folks in Africa, Asia, and so on for numerous reasons. And therefore, I would caution all of us to be very careful about transfer of training and the assumption that what works, what we're used to in a developed country is very similar or really applicable otherwise. There are issues in the developing world of systems are already built. The NGO world really exists quite strongly. Governments have developed systems to deliver services, which frequently is not the case in other places. There, in the United States particularly, is a culture of entrepreneurship. And this culture, by the way, has lots of good aspects and I think lots of difficult aspects, particularly if one is thinking of trying to create a network. Because entrepreneurs, if they are anything, are people who do not like to join anything. Entrepreneurs by themselves tend to be, I mean, there's lots of research and stuff on this, but the characteristic of people is that you're not going to get 50 of them in the room and all of a sudden begin some kind of serious association that will go further. It's hard work to do that, and Skoll is doing it as well as anyone. In any event, there's a whole lot of things that we would have in the developing world that likely don't exist in other places of the world. And I think we need to be careful about that as we have our conversation. Finally, to go back to the question that you asked, David, there are a few things that I think as a historian one would look for and to see if there is something here as opposed to some collective vision or near vision that we've all got, but it's not, you can't put it on the board and throw darts at it. And I think there are 5 points that I would just put out to be a bit provocative. I think the historian would look to see if we are generating useful knowledge. I'm not sure that we are. I think, well, I am sure that we are, but how useful and in what ways is open to question. He or she would look for whether there is some kind of institutionalization happening. Is it cross boundaries? Is it cross national boundaries? Is it global? Is it very local? And is there a difference if there is? Third, the historian would look at what we would call scaling up. That's a very big topic of conversation in the States, where a fair number of organizations have gotten along quite well at this first burst of dollar infusion. And now, among the best of them, they too are having difficulties in finding a capital market. So the fourth point would be capital availability. The Achilles heel of everything we all do, but with particular resonance, I think, for the social entrepreneurship models that we tend to talk about. And fifth, I would argue, is outcomes. Do we know enough yet to be clear that there are outcomes that we've got that we can talk about seriously? I would say in my looking back over a couple of decades, there are individual organizations that have done remarkably well, and there are more of them that are doing remarkably well in the States than ever before. Internationally or globally, it's bursting forth in different places, but it's a big world. So I think much is going on, but whether that denotes that we're making quick progress, middle progress, not so much progress, and so forth, I think that's an open question, and I would hope that that's what we talk about at the session today. Thanks.
Thank you, Ed. Once again, just to remind you to, if you have a question to ask or something you'd like to interject, feel free. I hope we're in the process of generating some knowledge here.
Right. Let me just say one more thing. There's a statement by Mark Twain, which I have to mention, which is, he said, most of what I remember best never really happened. So take it all with a grain of salt. Thanks.
Well, that's great. One of the issues that you brought up, the issue of scale and growth, of course, is in the mind of many, many people in this room, I'm sure. What my previous experience before writing about social entrepreneurship per se is I wrote a book about the Grameen Bank. And one of the things that I noticed about the Grameen Bank was that I went to visit the very first branch office in Jobra, first one. And what I found was that actually branch 1,000 was a lot better than branch 1. And branch 2,000, I suspect, is a lot better than branch 1,000 was. So this is an organization that as it grows, it actually gets better. Very different from a lot of the government programs where the pilot is the best and number 50 is not as good. And so the question is, how do you achieve growth with quality? And this is a perfect question for JB, because as College Summit, I've been following College Summit now for many years, and as College Summit has grown from serving a few students to now serving schools that reach more than 10,000, it's consistently gotten better, and its numbers have improved along the way. And so how do you achieve growth with quality? What's the secret?
Appreciate the chance to be on this panel. I look out there and I see a number of the mentors that have helped me along, so I hope to contribute something to this conversation. And I want to acknowledge Chuck Harris, who's the board chair of College Summit, who's there in the back. He's runs Sea Change Capital Partners, and he's here in case you have any difficult questions for me. What I thought I'd do is share 3 stories of stages in College Summit's development where we learned something about how to drive quality with growth, how to use growth to actually improve quality. But first, let me give a couple minutes of context regarding College Summit. At the core of our approach is recognition of the fact that in the U.S., probably the most cost-effective way to break the cycle of poverty in a family line is by getting a young person who would be first in their family to go to college through college. Because that person will earn over $1 million in additional income. Their children will be almost twice as likely to go to college. But there's, I think, an even bigger point. For the few of you who were here last year, apparently, Vice President Al Gore and Jeff Skoll talked about this slideshow movie idea they had. And something I couldn't help but notice in An Inconvenient Truth was that the story of the movie pivoted in a college classroom. Professor Roger Revelle taught the course that Gore took in college where the life-changing idea of global warming sparked for Gore. And I think college is the place where a lot of us found life-changing ideas. There's the Gore example. Wendy Kopp, for her, it was the idea of Teach for America. Professor Yunus kind of built the foundation of Grameen working with students in his economics class. And just a couple weeks ago, I was talking with a College Summit alumna named Samreen Vorda, who grew up in inner city Chicago. And her life-changing idea in college was about the importance of getting health care into low-income communities. She's now in medical school and had just come back from 2 months in Costa Rica, where she was learning about care in indigent populations. So College Summit's mission is to help low-income communities raise their college-going rates, spark life-changing ideas by helping high schools build college culture. We operate in 10 states in the U.S. To give you a sense, we work in urban areas. We work with most of the students in the city of St. Louis, most of the students in the city of Denver. With Gates' help, we'll be in 100 high schools in New York. In terms of rural areas, we work in the poorest county in the United States, McDowell County, West Virginia. And then in terms of outcomes, our high school cohorts have been producing significant college enrollment increases school-wide over baseline with externally validated data. There's 4 things that we do. One is we provide a course for all the seniors in the school, to a post-secondary transition course. The thought is when a young person has a plan for what they'll do after high school, they're more likely to finish successfully. Second, we provide professional development for teachers and counselors to run that course and raise their expectations of what students can accomplish in that school. Third, we help the school find the most influential students in the school, and we train them in 4-day workshops to begin senior year having already completed their financial aid and college admissions applications so that they can focus on supporting younger students and building college culture in the school. And then finally, we provide measurement tools so that principals, superintendents can see how their students are doing real time in their classrooms, but also outcomes measures by month and and annually in terms of the college enrollment outcomes they achieve. And I describe those 4 things because while our mission has always been the same, to raise college-going rates and spark life-changing ideas, what we've done, our method, has changed. And that kind of leads to David's question, which is, like, how have we seen growth drive quality? And the first a few numbers. Our growth rate in terms of students served and fee-for-service revenue generated has gone up 60% on average each year for the last 4 years. Each of those 4 years, we've also seen our cost per student reduced, and we've seen our percent in the high schools of students applying to college go up 15% each year. So we've seen some pretty strong growth coupled with some good improvement in quality. And the first story comes from 1997. At that point, we were simply running workshops for influential students, and we were doing them in 7 different states around the U.S. And McKinsey did a study for us and concluded that the one site, Colorado, where we were doing more concentrated work, multiple workshops, the model worked much better. What they found was that as student volume rose, the value proposition or the return on investment for colleges increased. So it was a lot easier for us to engage colleges, who are a key part of our model. So we were able to focus less attention on getting them engaged and more attention on the schools. So based on that, we increased our numbers of students significantly, but cut half our sites. And really saw a significantly improved performance in the next couple of years, and we've used that strategy. So I guess the first lesson we learned is that growth can just help you improve your value proposition, and that's one way you can improve quality. Second story was from West Virginia, from 2003. In between 97 and 2003, a principal and a college counselor from high school in Denver came to us and said, you know, we think this model could change the culture of our high school if you trained all of our teachers, had all the students go through your curriculum, and then trained a critical mass of students to be the change agents in the school. So at this point, we were working with entire high schools. And in 2003, the superintendent in Kanawha County, West Virginia, which is the capital city, the largest school district in the state, He had decided that he wanted to have his district organized around the principle of having all students in that district graduate from high school college ready. So he brought College Summit in to help make that structure work, make that come alive. And in this meeting, he was there along with his 7 principals. And what we were doing was reviewing their scorecards. So reviewing how each high school had been doing in terms of getting their students to create application portfolios, training teachers, and then getting their students to apply and then enroll in college. So after we presented the information and handed the scorecards, within 5 minutes, the principals bypassed the superintendent and us, and were just talking amongst themselves. And Paula Potter, who's the principal at Riverside High School, whose numbers weren't very good, turned to Bill Walton, who was the principal at South Charleston, and she just said, "Bill, what are you doing that we're not doing?" And he had 3 ideas around teacher training and course credit that he shared with her, and she took those ideas and saw some improved student performance the next year. What I think was telling about that, and the lesson we learned from that, is like once we got to once we had grown to the size where we actually had all the principals in the community engaged, and we had some transparent metrics, what happened was some self-organizing among the peers, and these kind of peer-to-peer engagement with some healthy competition, some ability to look at data together and problem solve and share some best practices. So like, through that peer exchange, they were able to make more progress quickly than our staff could with much more effort. So I think that's the second lesson, is that with growth, you can drive quality by taking advantage of networks that can self-organize around quality. And then the third story, and the last one, is going on right now. And that lesson is that growth can give you the opportunity to find levers at higher levels of the system. And I actually want to highlight that Skoll and Christy Chin, who was working with us during this period, was really helpful in helping us think through this. Last year we analyzed our high school's results. And we were looking at the schools that had done really well and those that had not done so well, and tried to compare and see what we could learn. And what we found is that the 4 out of the 5 differentiators between the highly performing schools and the lower performing schools were around district issues as opposed to school-based issues. So things like incentive structures for principals, whether the school district measured college enrollment rate formally. We found there was district-level issues that were driving the results to a significant degree. Basically that in districts where the district wasn't aligned around increasing college enrollment rates, the teachers and the students in the schools were swimming upstream in trying to make some progress. So that's a great insight. The problem was last year we were a school-based program. We worked in 100 high schools, but 30 of them where we were working with basically all the students. And of those 30, only 3 of those high schools were in one district. So we were basically in a bunch of high schools spread all over the place. And we didn't have enough volume in any district to warrant the superintendent's attention. And it wouldn't make sense for a superintendent to change systems that would only apply to one high school. So we realized we had to make a shift. And so this past year, what we realized was if in district engagement would be what would drive quality. But if we were just to get to a 3 high school a district level of engagement in each of our sites, we'd have to grow 70%. And I think the paradox was, because districts drove quality, it would be easier to improve quality by growing 70% than it would be to grow quality growing 0%. The results worked out pretty well. The districts have responded well. We'll be growing by 80% this year, and we'll go from having 1 district where we had 3 or more high schools engaged to having 8. So on the sales side of things, it's worked out well. We're just now going to start to see on the operational side. But our program director from Maryland was in the office last week and was just giddy. She's been around College Summit for years. She had just come back from her principals setup meeting. And she said, just for the first time ever, the principals came to the meeting having completed half the work that she was going to spell out that they needed to do. And that's because the district is aligned behind it. So we're seeing some early action in that regard. So I just think in summary, obviously growth presents some real operational challenges, but growth can also give you the opportunity to increase quality. And I just shared 3 ways that we've seen growth make it possible to increase quality. I know there are tons others, and would love to hear any of those ideas. Would also love to think about just within the context of government activity, what are ways that you could structure government models so that those approaches would see at least maintained, if not increased quality as those programs scaled as well. So thank you.
So thank you, JB. Can I have a question? Can you wait for the mic? Because this lady has the mic. Sorry.
Thank you. I actually wanted to just celebrate what Ed said because I'm an international practitioner.
Can you introduce yourself?
Yes,
Thank
certainly.
You.
Michelle St. Jane, Bermuda. And I'm really glad that you said the American model doesn't fit anywhere. I live in a jurisdiction that's paid a lot of money for international people, especially Americans, to get it wrong. So thank you for raising the bar on that. JB, I have 2 questions for you. One, are you going international? And secondly, do you use aptitude testing or isometric testing, which is what I believe the UK call it?
First off, I think there's actually significant potential. At the root of College Summit is the idea that low-income talent is undervalued in the United States. I would say comparatively, the college admissions process in the United States, though, is more holistic than it is in much of the rest of the world. In other words, in many other countries, it is more exclusive. Admission to higher education is more exclusively dependent on test scores than it is in the U.S. So that means that there's probably even more potential for structures that can support holistic selection of talent in other parts of the world than even in the States. So I think there's a great opportunity. We currently aren't operating internationally, but would be, we're interested in how we can support efforts in other parts of the world to find talent more so. And we believe that there's just lots of different ways to measure talent. Like anyone who's hiring somebody, you wouldn't hire somebody based on one test score. So we support testing as a way of evaluating talent, but we also try and make it feasible for low-income students to be evaluated on through other lenses as well.
Graham Lean from Daniel Partners. Could I just ask how College Summit funds itself and how you funded your growth?
Yeah, can I add on to that? Can you talk about the Proof Fund and the way you specifically have financed the future growth?
Yep. We realized a couple of years ago, or we set out a plan a couple of years ago through which we could get our communities to raise their college. We're trying to find a solution. And to find a solution, I think that means that you've got to have the outcome results you want. So in our case, that's community-wide college going rates going up. While it has to be affordable, we can't just fantasize that philanthropy will just scale and scale and scale and scale to serve every student. So we set out 4 years ago, and Chuck was the real brains behind this. And I also want to acknowledge George Overholser here, who has significantly helped us think through these issues. But we're looking to see how we could deliver the outcomes results we needed while generating enough fees to at least cover variable costs. So we see philanthropy as playing a role throughout, but we don't think philanthropy can scale and scale and scale. So our basic concept is getting philanthropy to be covering our fixed costs while fees cover variable costs. When we built out a 4-year plan to get 4 communities to reach that point and realized that we needed to raise we had about a $15 million deficit. So, as a site started to scale up, and before it had enough student volume where fees would cover variable costs, we had a gap. And so we went out and used a private placement model to raise $15 million in growth capital to fund that gap. It was actually at noon, I'm on a panel to actually kind of talk a bit more about that, but what was most striking to me is we were able to get mainly seven-figure investors to come in to invest in a single term sheet. So basically, instead of investing in a project that they wanted to push, which is one of the problems that most nonprofits face, is that investors want to, for us, we think teacher training is the key, so we'll just fund that. So they weren't investing in a project, they were investing in a plan. So they were just saying, College Summit, go out there, and in 4 years, we expect you to hit these 4 metrics. And we're going to meet with you every quarter to look at your results, but we are not going to micromanage or make you come back to us every time you have a new idea to get new funding to do something slightly different. You just go hit your numbers. And so we, within 9 months, raised the $15 million, and there wasn't a single restriction on those dollars. And I have to tell you that I was describing the story to a group of social entrepreneurs at a conference about a year ago, and everyone was nodding, 15 million, nice, but when I said no restrictions on the dollars, there was applause just lit up the room, because that's what so many nonprofit organizations innovation is strangled by. So that's a key part of it. So how do we get the fees? That is through fees from school districts and colleges for the curriculum and teacher training and then recruitment services that we provide.
Thanks, JB. Jan, I want to ask you about your work with Capricorn. When we were on the train, you were saying that our goal is to maximize investment. We're out there strictly, we're investors, and we want to make as high returns as we possibly can. But you're also investing the corpus of the Skoll Foundation, and you're working directly with Jeff. So you obviously, there's a bottom line at heart, which is to change the world. So how do you bring those two together when you look at investments, maximizing financial return, trying to find the best thing globally, what's going on, and at the same time embodying the sort of the spirit of Skoll?
It's really easy. And unlike probably nearly everyone here, of course, I have not made significant contributions to the social sector at all. So I think my role here on this panel was to sort of represent the different point of view of being an investor. And I guess to be inspired by and I should say that the reason that might be interesting is that, of course, because of the Skoll Foundation and Jeff Skoll and such, we have absolutely embraced that difficult kind of intersection, and we're certainly willing to talk, which is not as common as you might imagine. I'd say that even most foundations in the world tend to have a very, very black and white split between those who manage the capital for returns and for the endowment, and those who are writing checks and making grants. And so it makes it more interesting for everyone, but of course that's not generally what happens in the world. And we certainly can't point to enormous success yet, although ultimately, even though we lead with investing, with kind of in the back of our mind this intent to create some good out of it, as opposed to the other way around, I think that we'd be very disappointed if we were not very proud of what we had done also over a span of many years. But I was inspired, from JB here to think about, one possible answer or context for that, which is I actually came from the academic side, not quite schools, but I was in physics, and I think one thing that's harder for social entrepreneurs, a little less so for investing is really a profession, just like being a physicist is really a profession. And as an astronomer, you can go to anyone can go read a book about astronomy, and you can get all the ideas and know nearly as much about the ideas as an astronomer. So why do you go and, you know, spend 10 years, like I did in university settings? It's really to learn the profession of being a physicist, which is different. It's not about the ideas. It's about developing the skills to be able to frame very precisely, communicate precisely, calculate a lot of things very effectively. And it's sort of frustrating because, you know, somebody says quantum physics, and in an hour you can kind of get a gist for quantum physics. But you know what? It takes about 8 years of drilling and hard training to be able to just sort of do a simple calculation in quantum physics. And I think that, you know, investing is really not that different. It is a profession. And, you know, it's especially in countries like the United States that have a long tradition of capitalism, it's a fairly finely tuned game where, you know, everyone has a general sense of how it works, but it makes a difference if you're really, you know, versed in all the skills and all the tools that are required or not. And, you know, that comes with experience and with, you know, education, a lot of other things. So, of course, a little bit less defined still, I would venture, and things like social entrepreneurship, where there's still, you know, a lot of different ways to think about it, and it's a little less clear what skill do I really need to sort of be successful at this. And I think that's why maybe it's interesting to have someone like me on the panel, as, you know, to have a slightly different perspective on some of these issues in terms of, you know, scaling and, you know, sustainability. I mean, we talk about backing people, we talk about, you know, sustainable models, we talk about all the same exact concepts, but obviously from the perspective of an investor. And I'll just say one more thing. I mean, obviously, there's many things we could talk about as in sort of in a Q&A format with the panel and the audience. But, you know, one thing perhaps to start off with, which might make that statement even stronger, is, you know, being an investor is not even directly related to being a businessman, whether you're an entrepreneur or whether you're running a mature business or whether you're a financial manager. You know, being an investor, if you really want to oversimplify and kind of boil down to what it is, well, it sounds really exciting, but it's not that exciting. In the end, you really have sort of one main thing that happens, is that you either write a check or you don't write a check. And when you write a check, you have to collect bigger ones in the future. And, you know, it's the more you do investing, it's funny, because the more experience you have, in fact, as many times as it happens, the job gets sort of simpler and simpler and simpler, and you realize, you know, it really isn't as hard, and it's, you know, you have all this machinery and all this experience, and you realize that kind of your life gets simpler and simpler. And your ability to write a check and collect bigger ones, and remember, you need to collect a lot of checks in the future to sort of be competitive with what other people are doing. I mean, loosely, if you write a check for $100, you know, you're expecting, knowing that you're going to make some failures and that some things will go wrong, you're expecting, you know, 2 years later, 3 years later maximum to get twice that check back, and then again that same, you know, 200 check back a year later. I mean, it's really that simple, right? You're looking for this very quick turnaround in terms of dividends or capital gains or whatever that you're going after, and you know, that's a difficult master, if you like. It's a very humbling experience because, you know, there's a lot of very successful businesses that don't translate to that. In fact, there's a lot of unsuccessful businesses that are very, very good investments. I mean, it's not even directly related. Of course, it's related to business success, but not even directly. So I think, you know, I think every space benefits from folks who understand more and more about the profession of it and what really works and what's reproducible and what can be scaled. So I think I'll just leave it at that and hopefully answer some questions.
Thank you, Young. Ed has a comment. I'm going to throw this in with Ed's. You had made a distinction between something that's a good investment and something that's actually a good business. I didn't think about those two things as separate initially. So I wanted to ask you if you could talk about that, and Ed, add your question as well, please.
Two thoughts, and please remind me if I don't hit what you're getting at. But first, I was struck by what Ian said. If I got it right, that as you get better and do more investing, it gets simpler and simpler. In my world of social entrepreneurship, as you do it more, it gets harder and harder. There's some point, I'm not sure exactly what here, that it has something to do with the difference, and this is not being pejorative, between being a tradesman, tradesperson, and being an entrepreneur. And I think we need to think about moving the person who is getting bigger checks over time and getting better at doing that, and it gets simpler and simpler, into another professional, cultural space. Otherwise, there won't be much more money coming into the field of social entrepreneurship. So that's my first point. My second point is a more general one for discussion later, if you like. My view, having been on both sides of the street, is that, for the most part, organized philanthropy, both in the United States and in Europe, is and will remain for quite some time two-pocket philanthropy. You make it on this side, and you put it in this pocket, and then you give it away on this side from that pocket. There's a strong, high wall in between that rarely is breached, except in the States, I'd argue, besides the Skoll Foundation, by possibly a dozen of the smaller American foundations with corpuses under $250 million. In the U.S., there is, in my view, reasonably little hope to expect that organized philanthropy will be doing mission-related investing in the near future. There are many reasons for that, and we can talk about that later. But certainly one of them has a cultural component. And investors and board members of foundations are culturally unattuned to doing things that way. Now, that was my second point. You asked me the difference between investing and
or asking Jan the difference between a good investment and a good business. And we have a question too from the audience. So,
maybe, I don't know a question. My name is Henk Kiviet. I'm from Nero, the business school in the Netherlands. But before that, I worked in the venture capital industry, in the IT. And I hear the story of our gentleman that investing gets easier and easier the more you do. I fundamentally disagree with that. If you have a pile of money, and as a venture capital, you have that. And you have to invest the money in the field. Money is dump. Money is nothing. The intriguing task of an investor, and I take it now from a more philosophical perspective, I'm now in research, as you see, so you have a different view to it than when you are in the middle of it and have to estimate if the check you are writing is bringing you a higher return. And if it has to be in 2 or 3 years, even in IT, that is fast. I mean, we had periods of 8 to 10 years. But there is a nice book that's called From Richard Weaver, and that is IDs Have Consequences. And that is the thing with money. You need to estimate if the ID that is proposed to you in the business plan will deliver the products and the bigger check that you're writing and give the money to. That is the thing. And then as in venture capital, you need to go over the ID if the market, if there is a market for it, if the market needs to be developed, you can play your niche. And my experience is that that is for every investment a very tough job, and only years later you can make up your mind if you make your judgment right. I can fully see the point that the more you do it and the longer you are in this business, you build up your routine and your experiences. And sometimes you smell already at the door if the ID presented to you will bring you something or nothing. I mean, that is a kind of routine. But don't make mistakes by yourself, because the biggest example shared with everybody in the room is Microsoft. Do you remember all that picture of these folks? Would you have invested any dollar into it? I mean, maybe, probably, everybody has seen it. Nobody would have done that at that time. Everybody would have regretted it at this moment. I mean, that is the tough thing, and that is much more that I agree with Mr. Skloot in social entrepreneurship, but I would say it's
you're on the side of it.
Same business.
It's getting tougher.
Absolutely.
Okay. So what did you mean when you say it gets simpler?
Well, the good news is that I've successfully created controversy.
Dramatic tension.
Appreciate that.
As a writer, I love dramatic tension. It keeps the reader focused.
What I really meant to say is that it actually gets harder and harder over time. No. Not really. No, I guess, look, yes. No, obviously, and people who work with me, and several of my colleagues are here in the room, know that we're also, as artists are, or as, you know, like any craftsman is, you're unfortunately a quite tortured individual in that you really take seriously your job, and it is not easy. But what I meant to say is, as you learn a profession, you tend to start very broad and somewhat confused, and you tend to get better and better about what are the essentials of what works and doesn't work. And you also resist some of the realities of your profession. So a lot of people would like to be investors, but don't understand that, again, to massively oversimplify, that this issue that you're writing a check and expecting a bigger one in return is unfortunately a very simple reality of what you're looking to do. And it's very painful to meet a group, for instance, an entrepreneur, and really believe that they will have enormous success as an organization, or have an enormous impact on the world, or have great customer followership, or, you know, or many other things, but that it may not be a good investment. That's an example. And you know, early on, I think in your career, you tend to resist those kind of things, and you say, well, there has to be a way. Mm-hmm. And I think over time and with experience, you're better and better at removing some of the confusion, some of the emotions, some of all the elements that kind of come into the way of making good decisions sometimes, but which are also right, an important thing to embrace. So I didn't mean this, obviously you speak, you know, we are speaking somewhat in a simplified way, but you know, to answer a different example, I'll give two very quick examples. We're very, very broad investors, but let's just pick venture capital for a minute, which is by no means necessarily everything we do, but just because it tends to be visible and closer to what, you know, social entrepreneurship is about. You know, venture capital is not exclusively, but certainly one way to simplify venture capital is that it is to fund new companies that are fairly rapidly progressing to being public, and therefore create a lot of liquidity that immediately sort of pays back all those early investments. And you know, some of those stories are so successful, whether we take eBay or Google, or many others, that, and of course, we're all biased by seeing the best examples, which are examples like eBay or Google, but many venture investments are enormously successful, but the companies are not. I mean, if you actually look at the track record of venture capital, and you extend the time frame to maybe 10 or 20 years, the vast majority of these companies that did go public and provided enormous return to investors no longer exist, and in fact have destroyed a lot of economic value. And this is not a session to bash on the venture capital industry, but it's just an example of how there are really are some differences between the job of being the person giving and receiving checks and the job of being somebody creating a new venture or being an entrepreneur. It's actually a different profession. Now, there's an enormous overlap and common learnings and understanding, but it's not the same thing. The other, I want to make a quick point also on this element of, you know, it getting easier. One thing that might be really fundamentally different with social entrepreneurs is, as an investor, your mandate is not usually to solve every problem or even necessarily big problems in the world. You actually have the luxury of being as narrow as you want to be and as selective as you want to be. So if someone comes in with an enormous opportunity, there's really a need for some kind of business, but the tools that you have developed over the last 5 or 10 years that give you, you know, very effectively give you good answers as to your profession of being an investor, you know, maybe they're not applicable to that particular area. Just like, you know, physics tends to progress very, very rapidly and deeply in areas where we've developed the right physics tools to be able to make a bunch of calculations. And you know what? There's other problems that are just as interesting, but where we really haven't developed good machinery to advance and push things forward. And it's just not very productive to be a professor. And I've, you know, again, I've been in these situations on the physics side where, you can say, I really wanted to solve the core of the neutron star problem. Well, it's a tough one to solve. And I really don't know how to calculate that, and I don't know where to start. And you have the choice, you have the ability as a physicist to say, well, let me not focus on that thing. Let me focus on the magnetosphere of a neutron star, because there I know how to calculate something, and it's going to be useful. And I think, as an investor, you definitely have that luxury, is that you can sort of shut your eyes to things where your tools aren't working. And you can say, let me just apply them and favor the areas that I understand the best, where they're working the best. Understanding, of course, that as everyone, we're very competitive, we're very aggressive investors, and part of that is being always very leading edge. So we certainly don't stick to, well understood, boring things. We do a lot of things that are very creative, very leading edge, but we don't have to do everything. And that is a big luxury.
Can you invest in things that contribute to global warming?
I would say that, as obviously everyone here could respect, that as an organization we're particularly wed on that, and we stopped, if we don't think it's a hoax. So it would be completely incompatible for us to be long, in quotes, to have invested on the wrong side of that equation. And there still is a dearth of good ideas as an investor and how to live that. So we're certainly not satisfied with how our risks, our position is something we wake up every day worrying about, and we have made a lot of incremental changes to sort of incorporate that kind of thinking. But I don't mean to say that it's a solved issue for us. But no, so the answer is, is no.
Thank you. Jacqueline, Acumen has the difficulty of investing in entrepreneurs who are building businesses to make essential services affordable for poor people. And so you're investing both in people and both in business models that have not been proven. I know you've looked at hundreds of these examples over the past several years, and can you talk about what you've learned over the past 5 or 6 years, with all of the experience that you've had investing and also analyzing many, many different business models, serving the affordable group?
Sure.
You have while you stand on one foot.
Well, it's really interesting to be the last person on a panel like this. It's such a privilege in the way that David kind of brilliantly staged us, because I think Ed did such a great job at giving an historical perspective that really is such a reminder that this field is so new, and that we're all kind of grappling around in the muck and the mud, trying to find not only the things that work and be more cognizant about what doesn't work, but even bringing forth a lexicon. And so I want to actually go back to some of the things that Ed laid out as what are the 5 principles, just to give a sense of where I think we collectively might be going. But then when JB came in to talk about, even in education, looking at some of these market models, and in an earlier session to the Acumen Fellows, we're talking about market-based and what does that mean, and it can easily be understood as free market, which does limit access to poor people. But JB just gave an example of market-based, which recognizes the need for different kinds of money, philanthropy, government, fees, that can work together to extend services to the greatest number of people. And then, Jan, you just kind of threw me for a loop, because we think of ourselves as investors, and when you said, we write a check and we expect to get a lot of money back, sometimes twice as much, I was thinking, well, we kind of determinedly and deliberately focus on that high-risk, low-return market, and we do not expect to get big checks back. Acumen Fund raises philanthropic capital, and then we turn around and we invest equity and loans in both for-profit companies and nonprofit companies that we believe are finding ways to accelerate the delivery of basic services like water, health, housing, alternative energy to poor people who've really been left out of the global economy. To do it in a way that is ultimately scalable, we look for entrepreneurs who have the aspiration with us to reach at least 1 million people and financially sustainable, so that over time they will cover their costs, if not earn some level of profit. Every Monday morning at Acumen Fund, we have a team meeting, and we talk about an aha moment. And one of the aha moments I had in this panel was that I think what all of us are talking about and what this field is hurtling itself forward to really is the future of capitalism. And that there may be some level of recognition, whether it's intuitive in all of us or more systematic in our thinking, that's recognizing that since the fall of the Berlin Wall, we've started relying more and more on markets and capitalism as the answers to creating economic change, and we've seen enormous productivity, opportunity, technological innovation as a result, and then we've also seen this increasing gap between rich and poor. At the same time that, for the first time, probably in history, the rich really can see how poor people are, and the poor people can see how poor they are relative to the rich. And so we're really in this situation of instability, and I think looking for those kinds of models together that can start to bridge those gaps. And so I'm going to just tell you a little bit about the way Acumen Fund does it, but I think it's really important that when we open it up, because I look around this room and see so many people who are involved in this sector in different ways, that we start to try to move that conversation forward around whether we're making progress. Because God forbid this just becomes a niche where people say, well, it's kind of these crazy people who are out there on the fringe trying to create these altruistic, capitalistic models, and that's too oxymoronic in and of itself. That there's room for this out there in the world. David asked me to talk about whether we invest in entrepreneurs and or organizations, and how do we really look at the two together. And I think that Jeff last night did just a great job in terms of saying that one of the risks of social entrepreneurship is that we idealize and idolize the social entrepreneur as hero. And while they indeed are, and Amitabh Siddhangi, who runs IDE, which is a great organization for extending drip irrigation now to 80,000 farmers, which is about 500,000 people who have fundamentally changed their lives through his company. No one can build their businesses without a team. The first thing, though, we do is find those entrepreneurs who we think understand a few common principles that we really believe in. And the first is that they look at the poor as customers and not as passive recipients of charity. And even if you are ultimately delivering product to some of those poor people at a price point of zero, you have to understand how they make decisions so that you can reach them. And some people will be paying market price, some people will be paying whatever you can get them to pay. And we have examples of an ambulance company that's being so frustrated with the fact that in Bombay, a city of 18 million people, there are only about 15 working ambulances, and the ones that do work, you can only get if you pay a kickback to the ambulance company to get it to work, and you have to pay in advance of being taken to the hospital. A couple of guys created a company with the idea that we will have a profit-making but not maximizing company that will deliver ambulatory services to all people regardless of ability to pay. And so if you are taken to a free hospital, and it doesn't matter if you're poor or rich, it's just that most rich people don't want to go to free hospitals, it's free. And if you're taken to a fancy hospital, you're priced accordingly. And so the overall enterprise covers its costs. And we have $1 million equity position in this company. We believe that it will not only grow but prosper. And what's been really interesting about how this world is shifting is that wealthy individuals are now starting to contribute ambulances to the companies, pushing their capital costs down with a real sense that if I'm going to get greater efficiencies from this private sector company, I do better putting my ambulance here than I do with a more traditional charity. The second thing we look at is entrepreneurs who understand that there really is a spectrum of capital. And I think you've heard different people here talking about it. That it doesn't make sense anymore in our world, in a world where Americans put $250 billion into philanthropy every year. Pakistanis $1 billion into philanthropy every year. And yet we have this bifurcated system of, well, this is my charity and this is my investment. When in fact, if we started thinking about philanthropic money as our highest level of risk capital, we really could build different kinds of solutions that can use markets and also recognize where markets fail so that together we can reach more people. And so I just loved, I think, to restate some of what JB was talking about in terms of thinking about different pools of capital. And I'm going to tell a story of Sachin Mishra, who is a wonderful entrepreneur in outside of Delhi in India, who started off in the social sector and then got frustrated and thought there's got to be a better way of delivering goods and services to poor people in Bihar, where the average per capita income is about $90. So he built a company with internet kiosks, and I don't want you to get the wrong word of the wrong idea of what an internet kiosk is, but it's essentially selling to a franchisee, a poor person, a computer, a telephone, a cell phone, and a camera for about $1,500. They typically borrow the money, and then they've got an 18-month payback. And the first idea was to sell health services and education services, but people didn't really want to spend money on those services using this information. What they would spend money on were things like horoscopes, matrimonials, so to find wives and husbands, photographs. And so he started thinking about another way of doing a cross-pricing subsidy model, where people will pay for some services, other services can be delivered free. Over time, though, in building this business, primarily with his own capital and friends and family money, he started realizing that he also had a distribution system in place. There are now 1,500 of these, and he's building 3 more a day, each in a different village that serves 5,000 or more people. And so at about that point, he came to Acumen Fund because he couldn't find any traditional capital anywhere in the market. We invested about $1.5 million, primarily in equity, but also in loan. Now, that's philanthropic money that we raised, we very much expect to get back so that we can then reinvest it in other companies. Then, over time, he realized that his best entrepreneurs were women. But women had no access to more traditional forms of finance. So he came back to us and said, you know, here's our problem. And then we could use our network to call the Nike Foundation to get a grant for $200,000 so that we could create a guarantee system, which would essentially borrow another $800,000 to allow this entrepreneur and his company now to have a line of credit of $1 million that he could extend to women so that they could build these businesses and then prove the bankability of women within this distribution system. And that's just starting. But Nike also understood that if we're really going to be building a new market for poor people and we're bringing women in as entrepreneurs, we need to do some behavioral change piece. And so on top of the grant they made, they gave us more money to give a grant to this private sector company so that they could work with women's parents to allow them, their daughters, to actually take on this risk. So suddenly you have a private sector company working with the poorest people in the world who are bringing in grants, private sector capital, softer kinds of capital, equity, and loans. And I think that that's the way we're going to see more and more of these entities that are really creating change. And then, because we have a number of different kinds of organizations with which we work, we're starting to realize another aha, that we're actually building an ecosystem of different kinds of companies that are finding ways to understand how to price, market, and distribute goods for poor people. And they're also then bringing forth new kinds of products for the poor, whether it's low-cost eyeglasses or drip irrigation, and that those products can now go through a physical distribution system, and that then allows these entrepreneurs with the computer to make more money on an individual basis because they're selling these low-income, these low-cost eyeglasses. And Jordan Costello is another entrepreneur who's here, who runs Skojo, which does make these low-cost eyeglasses. Drishti is now one of their largest distributors of low-cost eyeglasses. And when you think about eyeglasses for poor people, it's the difference between, at age 35, they're being able not only to read their Qurans and their Bibles, which is very important to having joy in life, but it's the difference between them being able to be a tailor and being out of work. And so it's about finding a group of entrepreneurs that are growing around the world who see the poor as viable customers and then find ways to deliver goods and services to them that will change their lives, which is a different approach than just finding ways to build businesses that may be export models and providing jobs, which are also needed, but it's really about opening up markets. Another thing that was mentioned here that JB talked about was and it's linked to Ed Skloot's talking about knowledge are we building knowledge as a sector? And I think we're also at the beginning. If we're at the beginning of understand different ways of structuring capital, and at Acumen Fund we are now working on near equity types of loans, different ways of structuring equity so that we can actually have some hope of an exit over time. Very experimental, but because it's philanthropic capital, we really have a luxury to try to create these experiments. And what we're finding is we're able to really leverage other kinds of money, not only through guarantee schemes, but bringing in more traditional investors once they see that we can take the first level of risk from the kinds of entrepreneurs with whom we're working. But the second then is this knowledge piece, and the big piece of that is impact. How do we measure the change that we're making out there in the world? And I, again, think that as a world, we're really at the beginning of trying to understand that. We have something in Acumen Fund that we call the best alternative charitable option, the BACO analysis. And I'm going to use another example, which is long-lasting malaria bed nets. It's in the news all the time. There's this notion that we need to bring a long-lasting malaria bed net to every African. There are 950 million of them. And there's a debate over whether they should be sold for free or they should be delivered on a payment basis. And what we've learned over time by experimenting with the private distribution model is that through the private sector, we believe you could deliver these bed nets for between 50 cents and $1.20 per net. Right now, the UN is paying between $6 and $7 to deliver one net. That's above the cost, which is about $6 of buying the net. And so over time, if we take these enterprises' approaches to change and really start understanding our impact, we should then be able to go to the policymakers and say, you know, we have a choice as a world. Some of these solutions the private markets will not solve, but there are better ways of melding the public sector part of what it is that we are doing with the private sector to deliver the most products to the most people who need them in the most affordable way, frankly, for all of us as a world. And that's really why metrics get so important, not just to insist on accountability at the individual level, but they're pretty worthless if they're not helping us as a world make better decisions. And so one of the things that we're trying to do is create a portfolio database management system that ultimately, over the next 2 or 3 years, we'll be able to outsource so that lots of us can put the money, our information into it and be able to start benchmarking against different organizations that are out there. Going back, though, to what Ed had talked about in terms of are we creating useful knowledge as a field, I think we are. I think we're at the beginning, though, of finding the language to articulating what that knowledge is. Are we scaling up? Starting to. Acumen Fund has about $20 million that we've invested in 5 countries in health, water, housing. And what's been quite extraordinary to me, given that 6 years ago we had to look at 700 organizations to find 2 that we thought we could invest in according to this model. We're now at a place where we're capital constrained, and we're now at a place where we have seen our entities deliver goods and services to more than 10 million people, create more than 16,000 very good jobs in the context of very, very low-skilled people. So the numbers are starting to show that you can scale this. If we use smart capital, as JB said, not the kind that's little piecemeal, but where you're going in with real injections of capital in a way that matches the business models of these companies. The notion of capital availability, I actually think that there's a growing level of capital, and where we're missing the boat is on the other things that he's talking about, is are we spending enough time and money on really bringing knowledge into the field and then moving it back out? The woman who said that so often we just impose our ideas from the top up, from the top down. We've got to be better at really listening to who the poor are, and then finding ways to lift those kinds of models and then build a network. And then the final piece is the institutionalization across boundaries. And I leave that because, I end with that because I think that it's also linked to probably the biggest gap that we at Acumen Fund see, and also one of the biggest opportunities. And that's, if you think and agree with me that it's not just money that makes a good investment, particularly when you're opening markets that have terrible infrastructure, high levels of corruption, people who make $1, $2 a day and have to make all of the decisions for their livelihood, their lives within that, then you've got to bring talent into the field. And the good news, and we're learning this through our Acumen Fund Fellows program, is that there is a yearning in young people around the world, not just in the United States and Europe, but I would say in every country on earth, to use their skill set and find ways to bring business skills to bear on solving really tough, complex social issues. And just as one little microcosmic example, with our Acumen Fund Fellows programs, where young people, and when I say young, they're between the ages of 26 and 50 this year, they will go into the field for 9 months to work on a specific deliverable, whether it's in a malaria bed net manufacturing factory, an artemisinin production factory, working with drip irrigation in the fields, micro credit in Pakistan, and then share their knowledge not only inside the institution but across the organization. Between that program and our summer intern slots, for which we have 4, we received over 1,000 applications from 60 countries, including Micronesia now. How in God's name someone in Micronesia found out about this opportunity, we still don't really understand, except for the power of the internet, the power of communications. And so I hope that in the next few years, we see a global core of young people that really are kind of the next step of John Kennedy's vision of taking the best and the brightest and moving them not into government, although it makes me nervous that none of us come from government, because at the end of the day, we've got to find ways to influence policy, and we've got to be policy makers. But that the best and the brightest are really grappling with what the future of capitalism looks like and how we take what we've learned about efficiency and start extending it to really create a more equal world where 3 billion people aren't left out of the global economy, but are finding ways to get rid of the constraints that are in their way and really bring them into the global economy so that we all prosper, and frankly, we all have a lot more dignity at the end of the day. And so I've just been really privileged to be at the end of this and hope that we can take the conversation where we are now and start moving it forward.
Thank you. Thank you. I think we keep on coming back to Ed's profound point of the importance of building knowledge. And I think one of the things that I've learned in listening to you now is that there seems to be a very, very big difference in our conception of where the knowledge is. I mean, you know, is it in universities, is it in big development organizations, or is it actually scattered and decentralized around the world in the heads of all the people out there? And I'm thinking about my experience with the Grameen Bank. Grameen always used to say, we have lots of money, but we have no ideas. The idea was that villagers understood their own skills, they understood the market opportunities, and Grameen was going to enable them to use their skills and their understandings. And I know in the development of some of the products in Acumen, like, for example, the Skojo eyeglasses, Skojo has co-created its eyeglasses with villagers, you know, asking them, you know, villagers really care about attractive eyeglasses. They don't just want low-cost eyeglasses, they want low-cost eyeglasses that have panache. And bed nets are not just bed nets, they're home comfort products serving a whole series of needs. And I know that you really listen and work with people, work with the communities and the companies that you support, do that. What's the role of listening in terms of co-creating things with people, both in making them affordable, but also capturing the information that you couldn't possibly think of in New York City in terms of what really matters to a poor person? How do you structure that?
Well, what's been really extraordinary for us is a real understanding that probably the best listening technology that we have in the world is the market, and that when you and it's not only it not only gives us the best information, but it gives us the information most quickly. So when you go out as a donor and say, do you like this? This thing that I'm going to give you? 9 out of 10 people will say, we like it very much. And then they'll put it under the bed and never use it again. If you say, will you buy this? Then it's, well, we'll buy it if it's a different color, a different shape, and it tastes different as well. And so a couple of examples where the practice of listening has really brought us to a whole new level. One is of the way that we think about things, and also kind of the beginner's mind, because particularly for people like me who've been spending a lot of time in and out of the developing world for decades, you start getting hardened in terms of expectations and assumptions that you make. And so how do you really go in each time anew? And one of the examples that kind of really blew me away was with water filtration on lots of different levels. So India, you've got a situation with a government that very proudly is proclaiming, you know, water is a human right and we're going to bring free water to all Indians. That's the ethos. The reality is that 700 million people have no access whatsoever to clean water. Those people living in slums pay 30 to 40 times what their middle-class counterparts pay for it, and those in the rural areas just depend on whatever they can get from the well or streams. So Acumen Fund has invested in a company called Water Health International, which uses a UV filtration technology to bring in water. Now, this is a $13 billion a year aid industry, and we couldn't find any information anywhere in the industry, neither WHI nor Acumen Fund, on how much water really does a person drink. Forget about how much they should drink. So we had to create a business model based on WHO estimates, which are 8 liters a day per person. The reality is when you charge people 1 rupee a day for 15 liters, on a per person basis, people will drink 2 liters, which you might say then is a pricing problem. But a couple of things happened, which was really interesting in the villages that WHI is working in. The first is, as anyone who knows in water, as anyone who's worked in water knows, that only women are the bearers of water. They go to the wells, they carry the water, typically on their head in big containers. Men never carry the water. But for some reason, and we still aren't completely sure about this, by bringing in a technology into a village, a rural village, and having a different kind of water container, only men are coming to the water plant to get the water that they're buying for their families. The second insight was that within 10 days of putting the plant into the village, delivery services therefore get established by the local community. And men are willing to pay more for the delivery service than they are for the water itself. So suddenly you're in a situation where it may not be a pricing problem. It may be a marketing problem, and that over time, people may want to use more water. Right now, they're just thinking about it for drinking, but that once they understand that there's other kinds of benefits associated with washing and cleaning with water, with the clean water, they may end up spending more for that water. The second thing is what they've done for the marketing is recognizing that the government is bringing in water dispatch places where the water is free. And so that's where people will go to get their water for doing most of their washing and cleaning. And so WHI's strategy is to put their pay water right, 10 feet away from the government source. So people will come for their government water and then go and buy their pay water, and there's always a huge line. And counter to all of the naysayers, this small company, 5 years old, now has 100,000 customers and is growing rapidly across India and is becoming a real model where we are starting to understand why people make decisions and how people make decisions. Malaria bed nets as well, where the UN is making long-lasting malaria bed nets. It's at a $6 price point and distributing them for free. And as I said, we've been experimenting with if you charged people even $1 instead of free versus the $6 full subsidy, what would they pay it? Would they not pay it? And would they use it more? Would they not use it more? And one of the ways that we learned a lot was not by us going out to sell it, but by having African women sell it themselves. And when you listen to the way they sell, it is so different than the way a public health worker would sell a bed net. Instead of coming in as we would potentially sell it and say, this is really good for your health and your child's health, so you should buy it, or you should use it even, the African woman entrepreneur will say, you put this net in your house and all the bugs will go away. It's a really beautiful color, and you can hang it in the window and it'll make your house really pretty. Your neighbors will know that you care about your children, and you can sleep through the night for the first time. So the things that they start talking about are beauty, status, comfort, And then kind of as an add-on, and by the way, your children will not get sick. And I think we need to think more about it, that rich people do not and should not have a premium on beauty, on comfort, on usability, and that we've got to be much more deliberate and focused on designing goods and services for poor people. The only way to do that effectively is to really listen to them. And the best way to listen to them is to find out the market price that they're willing to pay. We will learn that there are some people who can't pay, and then we might find a way to get that product to them at a zero price point. But there's a power in the market, if combined with empathy and compassion, that really can lead to a lot of our solutions.
That's beautifully said. We have two questions.
David, one comment on the point on listening. I think we all have to listen to our customers. If that customer is philanthropy, we get really good at listening to what our donors are interested in. And if our customer is school districts, we get really good at listening there. And also, the more we charge our school districts, the more they help us listen. Because when they're paying lots of money, they be damn sure that we're hearing what their concerns are, or they'll walk away. And so it's not just that, you want to be attuned, but when you actually start charging, your customer has a greater stake in having you listen, and they spend more of their brain share on getting you the information you need to improve the services for them.
And we find that sometimes with poor people, if you charge too little, they think, why are you giving me the bad quality stuff? And so there's also a sense of, people want to be seen, they want dignity.
Hi, I'm Cliff Pryor from Unlimited Foundation for Social Entrepreneurs in the UK. We support about 1,000 entry-stage social entrepreneurs a year in the UK. Really inspired by what you're doing at Acumen. I was interested in your point about availability of capital and availability of people to invest capital in. And you commented that when you started, you had trouble finding people. And now you have trouble finding enough capital for the people who are good to invest in. And I raise that because there is a prevailing view that capital for social entrepreneurs to scale up is in short supply. And I think that's worth just challenging. And certainly some of the people that we work with who are social investment houses in the UK say, actually our big problem is finding the investment-ready candidates. So what was the journey? What happened in that journey?
Well, the truth is that at the very beginning, we didn't really know what we were doing. We were making everything up every single day, and so even getting our IRS approval, which had a huge red flag on it, even when we got it, was really difficult because suddenly we were going to the IRS and saying, we want to raise charitable money so that we could invest loans and equity. Thinking that there was all this opportunity to do it because I had started a microfinance organization in Rwanda 20 years previously, and I had been at the Rockefeller Foundation, and I had seen stuff happening in housing. But when we really started digging in, we couldn't even find, among many traditional organizations, we couldn't even find financial statements for any of the organizations with which we were dealing. Kind of back-of-the-envelope budgets, but no financial statements. So we really had a hard time at the beginning surfing and searching the internet. The networks weren't really out there either, and we frankly didn't have the networks. So over time, not only were we able to start building networks, but the world has changed wildly in the last 6 years. And I was listening to Professor Yunus yesterday and thinking, it really took 30 years for microfinance to mature to the place where it is right now. And so there's a lot of capital going after microfinance because you're looking at returns of 20 and 25% on these funds. So we're seeing securitization and funds of funds that are starting. Well, in this world of social entrepreneurship where you're trying to build companies that serve poor people in new markets, we're really at the beginning stages. We're back to where it feels to me like we were in 1985 in microfinance. But it's starting to move. One of the problems, I think, on the capital constraint side is that a lot of people who are looking to place their capital are seeing the experience of microfinance and saying, well, why can't I put my money in you, Acumen, and get market returns? Because these companies are sustainable. They're paying you back. And so there's a bit of a distortion as the the social enterprise space starts getting more complex, because microfinance is really the granddad, and then the more social enterprises for poor people is still at the childhood, adolescent phase. And so my response is, if you really are in the high-risk, low-return market, and you have 10 enterprises, your best case scenario might be a 5 or 6% return on one investment. Not like yours, where you might get 40 times return on your best one. And so if we lose one investment, which we will, we've lost 10 or 20% of our portfolio. And so we need philanthropic money still that's willing to be put into these intermediaries that are investing in social enterprises, even though that money will be recycled. We're now at a place where we're starting to play with the idea of a second fund where we can pay people back 2% over 10 years. Very, very low returns. I think there's a market for it, but this is uncomfortable space because we're so used to either more traditional capital or more of the charitable side. So I think that there's both sides are starting to grow and get more sophisticated, and there's slight mismatches that are happening along the way, if that makes sense.
You know, you can look at this as a half full or half empty glass. I want to say that we can have a conversation at the individual deal level, and the particularly good cases that Jacqueline is giving us talk to that. We can look at it as a as a sectoral set of organizational issues. Let's go up the chain. As how an organization is growing and developing. We can look at it then as a sectoral or subsectoral marketplace in health in a particular place and time, and then we can look at it more globally and societally. And at each of these different levels of conversation, there are different reasons to be optimistic and to be pessimistic. I would argue, however, on all of those 4 counts, the fact is that the supply of capital is puny. The supply of capital that we're talking about is a fly speck here. And that if we walk out of the room and we make the assumption that if I can get enough for my organization so that we can do a couple more deals or projects in the next 12 months, we then will have had success. The fact is we're working on that level of the ladder, which does not include the larger case that we have to make in order to make social enterprise work. That's right. The level of capital availability in this room and the people who are paying attention to it is minuscule and cannot do the work that even Jacqueline is thinking about doing if she was able to raise 20 times what she can raise in the next year. It's urgent that we not get stuck in our own project mentality so that we can understand that the issue is moving the capital system itself in order to make all ships rise.
Well, I think part of what Ed is saying is that what we're seeing is a phenomenon with a lot of new philanthropists that are saying, well, you're doing it, so I want to do it. And so then you see lots of people that are now trying to set up mechanisms to create one-off investments, which is not also creating a capital market. It's not creating a capital pool. And so then you've got organizations scrambling, trying to get little bits of money, which allow then the big institutions, which is what we really need, to say, this is really still a niche. And we've got to start getting scalable entities that are showing the real capital.
Okay, I have a reflection actually to all of the people here on the floor. My name is Uffe Elbæk, and I'm chairman of the Chaos Pilots in Denmark. But David, when you started this little exercise that we should stand up and down, and we suddenly saw that there was no people from the public sector, I really couldn't understand the reaction from the audience that it was a bit of fun that the public sector was not here. And I actually think that there's a very, very important voice which is not present in our discussion. And I actually just want to underline it because we talk so much about, there's a lot of hype around social entrepreneurs. There's a lot of hype around social responsible business. But I really, really miss some good stories about heroes in the public sector. And I just want to underline this. Then a question to you in the panel. Where do you really think the most interesting social innovation takes place right now? Is it in the private sector? Is it in the public sector? Or is it in the non-profit sector? Or it's maybe something in between? I got the feeling, Jacqueline, when you talked that actually some of the examples you told was really, really interesting new partnerships. And personally, I've made quite some businesses, but I never felt like a businessman. I've done a lot of public projects, but I never felt like a public service person. I've done a lot of grassroots projects, but I never felt like an NGO. I feel something in between. I identify with something in between what we're talking about right now. And my question is, where's the most important social innovation taking place right now, seen from your perspective?
Well, I'm gonna, does anybody want to take this? Does anybody from the audience have an idea? I think, I'm just going to add something before, while you think. I think your point about government is profound, and the reaction perhaps is a reflection of frustration and an emotional. I was at a conference on social entrepreneurs a number of years ago, and they pooled the audience. They had one of those voting things. It was the Schwab conference in Brazil. And they asked how many social entrepreneurs wanted to work, felt that they needed to work with government in order to increase their impact, and 80% said they needed to. And then they asked how many actually were or had plans to in the near future, and only 20% did. So there's obviously a big gap between what people feel they need to do in order to increase their impact, perhaps what they feel they can do, or where they have access. And that, I think, might explain the little laughter or whatever, which reflects frustration.
Oof, I wildly think it's in all three places. And I think that there's and this goes back to this idea of let's create a global core of the best and the brightest so that young people see legitimate career paths in these uncharted territories. I don't know what the name of it is yet, but that people are starting to do it all the time. And I deliberately said young people, people in their 50s and 60s are now changing careers because they want to use their skill sets to do new and exciting things that help other people. That's an enormous shift in morality and interconnectedness that we should be tapping into as a world. And if you look at, Rockefeller Foundation is hiring lots of people out of McKinsey in the private sector right now. We partner with IDEO and Katzenbach Partners, two great private sector firms, and our people go back and forth between the firms very fluidly. And I think that the young people today will move in and out of all three sectors. And so our job is to bring in, which is why it gets so important to get the language right and the metrics right, so that we are finding the most innovative people within institutions. And then part of our job becomes to help them shape their institutions. But it's really the power of individuals now. And then the final thing I would say, just to Ufi's great point, is that if at the end of the day we are not influencing policy, you got to ask yourself, so what? Because 100,000 compared to 700 million people who don't have access to water in India is really a drop in the bucket. And so we need to not only get the metrics right, because as I get older, I am less and less sure that data is what influences policy. But if you can take that data and you can really create great stories around it, maybe we can get these social enterprises to influence policy in a way that we as a world not only can demand it, but then use the new technologies that we have at hand to hold ourselves, because we are government, more accountable.
And who has the mics right now? Okay.
My name's Dorothy Stoneman. I'm from Youth Build USA, and I'm one of the people who has spent most of my life building public-private partnerships. And if we hadn't, and this is in the United States, if we hadn't been able to bring $700 million of public money into the low-income communities where we work building housing with low-income young people building the housing, we never could have scaled up with quality. And so I want to say that not only are we talking about the future of capitalism, I believe we're talking about the future of democracy. We're talking about the future of democratic capitalism. And if we as individuals are not willing to join, coming back to what Ed said, if we're not willing to join to create a movement that makes policy, influences and makes policy, that accesses the government capital, because that's where the largest capital, which has an obligation, an inherent obligation to solving these problems, in cooperation with and tapping the incredible creativity and resource that comes from this generation of entrepreneurial energy. That's got to be our goal, is to make the partnerships where we use the strengths of the different sectors to create lasting solutions and really radical paradigm shift in how both capitalism and democracy work to solve those problems. And it is possible, and there are wonderful people inside government, there are wonderful people who are elected officials, and we need to work closely with them and become them and change the whole way business is done.
Thank you, Dorothy. Great point.
I meant to ask a question.
Oh, okay.
and if you're open to a question at this late stage, I wanted to ask Jacqueline to say a little bit more, since you were the one who raised the point of making policy, of influencing policy, of successes that you've seen in those partnerships.
And let's be punchy now. We have 10 minutes and a lot of people want to ask questions.
You know, we're just starting on that. I think that that's been our biggest insight, that we're starting, you know, on the bed nets, the closest thing we have is now the World Bank saying to us, let's really look at the different price points that people will be willing to pay. And so we have this partnership with the World Bank, Sumitomo Exxon, and a local NGO in Kenya that's experimenting with price points at which people will be willing to pay for the nets. If it works, then the World Bank would consider rolling out a continental-wide strategy. So there's a big if, but things are starting to be put into play. But we have, using the baseball analogy, singles, home runs, and grand slams, and we haven't gotten a grand slam yet. And the grand slam is when you've fundamentally changed policy.
Thank you. Ido Dror, the University of Geneva and the Social Re Project. I wanted to touch on a question that rises out of the poor as customers and take that a little bit further and get your input on individuals versus communities. We try very hard to empower poor communities to become their own insurance companies and take on all the normal function, including benefit package design, claim processing, and all kinds of things that people say the poor don't understand, they can't do, they're illiterate, they're numerate, and so on. And we're facing a lot of resistance saying that it can't be done because communities are so hard to manage and you have to work with individuals. You bring up the water situation. There's a wonderful example in northeast Rajasthan in the Apni Yojana product where KfW, the German Development Bank, put in the infrastructure and the communities had to pay for water in tribal areas where they never had to pay for water because water comes from the sky. And people said it would never work, and it works wonderfully with 1 meter per village. And each village has to come up with their own way of then distributing that, whether an adult is worth 2 children, is worth 3 camels, or however you want to work that out. At the end of the day, 1 bill per village per month with a 98 repayment rate, and it works wonderfully. And so when we are trying to take it forward to the next level, what I'm asking is, from people like yourselves, when you look at investment, how does the social capital level of the communities that you're involved with come into your considerations? Are you happy with the level of social capital that is in the investments that you have right now? And how would you suggest this issue, if relevant, goes forward in the public debate? Thank you.
You want to take it?
You know, the frustrating thing at Acumen Fund is every question almost we answer with, it depends. That what we would look at Acumen Fund is there, do we believe in the financial sustainability of this into the long run? If it's a social capital model that we don't think will ever scale because it is so labor intensive to create the social capital that's needed, then we think, not that that's not important, but that's not our role in terms of bringing forth models for solving problems of poverty using enterprise models. If we think that by using a social capital model with a level of financial subsidy, as you're talking about, using government, and we really believe that you can depend on that government over the long term, then we absolutely would look at that model. So for us, it's, do we trust that the entrepreneur has the ambition and the aspiration and the self-awareness to know that she or he needs to have a good team around herself or himself? Do we see the ability of this to scale so that it can influence policy in the long term? And do we see it moving to financial sustainability, recognizing that financial sustainability models often have subsidy within it?
One line. Just a quick answer from my part. There's no necessary connection between social enterprise and social capital. There can be, depending on the project, and often it happens in the world of microcredit and a few other places. But I think that that is a subject that has its own legs and deserves to be discussed in a parallel track.
We have a question. We started 10 minutes late. If we go 10 minutes late, is that okay with people by a show of hands? Or I guess if you need to leave, you can leave. Okay.
Hi, my name's Matt Scott, and I'm here with two hats. Firstly, I'm a co-founder of a social venture called Cosmos Ignite Innovations that's bringing safe and affordable light into India. And secondly, I'm also an associate with Bridges Ventures, which is a mission-based VC fund. Having been through the experience of sort of trying to raise money in this social venture space, I think my own view is there's still a massive shortage of capital in this sort of middle ground of a for-profit social venture. The world's definitely bifurcated. The people either want to give away money or they want to invest money. And this sort of middle ground of trying to reach the pocket in between makes people feel very uncomfortable. I think as an investor, I've seen sort of two ways that money's now starting to enter the space. Firstly, in terms of sort of mission-based investment, a bit like Acumen Fund, but then also through the sort of quantification of external benefits like we've seen in the environmental space, such as carbon trading, that's starting to bring in the main financial markets. So it's encouraging to see that, but I just wondered, you know, from the panel's perspective, whether you think the sort of the middle ground is going to be filled from a non-profit perspective, or is it going to be the attraction of for-profit financial capital coming in? And if so, in sort of 10 years' time, do you think there'll be any sort of big step changes in terms of the financial markets that really see a much, much bigger flow of capital into this middle ground?
That's probably...
Okay. Jan, you want to tackle that? Do you feel you want to tackle that question about maybe frame it as how can we bring in more investment from people who think from the point of view of full market investing into what we've been talking about?
Sure.
And we'll go 5 minutes longer because we have a request to go just 5 minutes more.
No, and obviously that's a big topic, but I mean and this what I would say on it is probably obvious to most people here, which is, of course, the closer that, I mean, any new model is going to have some range of applicability, and I think where people are sometimes skeptical or question is, you know, how many different areas can we find to apply, you know, a model that's different from what people are used to. And there are obviously advantages to, as closely as something can fit into sort of normal business practices or investment practices, the easier it is going to be to, you know, have a deluge of capital happen. I mean, if I take a related kind of problem, let's take alternative energies. We've been very aggressive investors, say, in biofuels. And, you know, it's very obvious there that, remember, that's a case where, just like in social entrepreneurship, we're looking for sort of a phase change to happen. We're looking for a new equilibrium that's different from the status quo. And people, as investors, are looking for what are profitable paths to get to that new equilibrium and then benefit from it when it happens, right? There's a big sort of theme around, a big common theme around social entrepreneurship and investing. And in a case like that, I mean, we, you know, a few $100 million of private equity capital have, on the basis, frankly, of government initiatives that are quite costly, that cost a few $1 billion a year, you know, small amounts versus other things, but big amounts versus other things, have then attracted, you know, multiples of that of what I would call public equity capital, and approximately, let's say, $15 billion in the United States alone of construction loan and bank type capital. Those are big numbers, but they're actually really small numbers versus, you know, what still needs to happen for fully that phase change to be realized. Now, I could tell you that nobody in that industry believes that you know, trying to attract 15 billion of capital with a model that's too far from what people are used to is going to work in this environment. It might work in 5 years or 10 years, but right now, if you want to access that kind of capital, you have to fit fairly closely to what people are used to seeing.
So you're saying make it look like what investors are used to seeing. Well, this is kind of like what JB did with the private placement for College Summit. This is a document that investors look at all the time. So they're comfortable with that. You don't have, the educational process is much less.
It's fitting in within, again, the language and the tools that people have developed and frankly refined over many years. And the more you deviate from that, the harder, the more battles you're going to have, the more convincing you're going to have to do, for sure.
I'm Dan Salcedo from People in CatGen. We do e-commerce with SMEs in 44 countries. But I wanted to ask, it seemed like all the panelists were talking about what seems to be a situation where you have to look for a balance, and there's certain trade-off. If you try to maximize the financial returns, you have to yield a little bit on the social, and if you try to maximize the social, you wind up not getting the maximum financial returns. Do you have any examples of any social enterprises where you're actually maximizing both sides at the same time?
So, by the way, my answer, I don't know if the question is directed to me, but my answer is, I would say most people in the investment world would tend to actually think exactly the opposite, which is when you are looking for these sort of phase changes to happen, they tend to sort of either happen and you have success or you have failure. And the areas where you're sort of in between and you've tuned things that they're kind of investments and not, is actually really, really hard, you know, equilibrium to find. That being said, that's simplistic, and I think there's a lot of areas where you can apply a model that's a little in between. There's just, right now, there aren't a lot of examples. Most of the examples would fall in what you say. If I take, you know, let's take a simple case like a .com company, because that doesn't bother anybody, like Google. Google is about making information accessible, and it is the most successful venture capital investment in history. It could have been started as a social enterprise, but it was started as a business, and it's in fact the most successful business from that perspective.
It's funny, I was going to use the same example as Google.
Yeah.
I think the differentiator is that if you are creating a market for the world's poorest people, by definition, you've already limited your short-term returns if you're trying to bring basic services to them. If you're trying to bring cigarettes, shampoo, soap, you can actually make a ton of money. And so I think there is always a balance and a trade-off around that particular market group and what it means to build and accelerate markets for basic services, which is essentially saying, we know that there's a market failure. Traditionally, we've looked to government. It hasn't provided it. Let's find another solution. And so there's a public good inherent in the private initiative that somehow needs to be figured in.
Okay, well, we have 1 minute left, so we can have one quick question, and then we'll just sum it up.
Hi, can you hear me? Melissa Carson, I'm Voice of the Poor Foundation. I wanted to kind of stay on that same theme. You talked about fitting in with the language and tools of investors of today. And if we think about the ROI, return on investment, which is traditionally a financial metric, we think about some of the language we've used today, the future of capitalism. One of the things that's, I think, allowed us to pursue the capitalistic model for so long is there's an ability to understand ROI as a simple and common metric for impact in the financial sector. Where we are now, I think, in this sector, as it's a nascent sector, is around anecdotal evidence. We heard yesterday ideas that are at first challenged and put down and eventually become self-evident. But those are typically anecdotal, quite diverse, happen in a huge range of areas. And what I wanted to ask is, from the wealth of knowledge that you all bring, are we gravitating towards a couple of simple, common ways of thinking about our social return on investment that funders and others are starting to gravitate around as a logical and intuitive return? Or are we still too nascent to be there? Thank you.
The college access space in the U.S. is an interesting one because the outcome measure is pretty clear. It's college enrollment rates. And what's so interesting is that there is now a the ability to get result data from a national database at a very low cost. So I think you can probably speak to some more complex ways of evaluating ROI, but I think college access will become maybe the first space where you could actually develop an outcomes-based market in the U.S., because it's possible for different organizations to that have to report their expenses to actually have transparent school-wide outcome data that can be reviewed year after year after year. So you could actually have a competition based on outcomes per dollar.
Anybody want to add anything before?
I think it's a subsectoral issue. I mean, I don't think there's any grand metric in the sky. So for healthcare or public health or something, will there be some sets of metrics, and others there will not be. What I think one of the larger issues when we're looking to try to get to some harder way of looking at stuff is to change the way people's minds work. This is a mindset question. It is not a metric question first and foremost. So if you can't get in the door, metrics are useless. So we're talking about issues of mindset and culture. We're not talking about issues, I mean, we are, but I'm making it a different point.
I think just to end, and maybe we can end with Ufe's question, where is the innovation happening? It's pretty clear from this conversation that there's many, many different ways of looking at the world. There's many different tools. Some of them have been dominated by business historically. Some of them are in the hands of the social entrepreneurs. Some of them are in the hands of government in terms of the way of understanding solutions. And it seems to me that the innovation is perhaps occurring in the places in between, where we can pull together and integrate mindsets, develop knowledge that really is that's sewing together all of society so it can function as a whole and develop solutions that work on many different fronts. So thank you very much for your attention, and please thank the panelists.